The U.S. steps up the rhetoric over the showdown in Syria. Deadly industrial accident at Shanghai storage facility. And locally, Elsie Leung speaks out on political reform.
Good evening. The United States is edging towards a military strike on Syria. U.S. President Barack Obama said he was weighing limited and narrow action after a chemical weapons attack in Syria that Washington says was carried out by President Bashar al-Assad's regime. And according to an unclassified U.S. intelligence assessment, nearly 1,500 people were killed in last week's attack. Alan Buckner reports.
Obama continued to build the case for military intervention in Syria. He described the August 21st attack as a challenge to the world.
We cannot accept a world where women and children and innocent civilians are gassed on a terrible scale. This kind of attack threatens our national security interests by violating well-established international norms against the use of chemical weapons.
But Obama said any action will be limited.
We're not considering any open-ended commitment. We're not considering any boots-on-the-ground approach. What we will do is consider options that meet the narrow concern around chemical weapons.
While Obama expressed a preference for multilateral action, France is now America's only major public ally, after the British Parliament voted earlier this week not to take part in any military action against Syria. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says his government has proof that 1,429 Syrians, including more than 400 children, were killed in last week's attack. But he admits American military action may not be popular.
Now, we know that after a decade of conflict, the American people are tired of war. Believe me, I am too. But fatigue does not absolve us of our responsibility. Just longing for peace does not necessarily bring it about.
But there are also calls against military action.
I think rushing in on this one, I know the line was drawn and things apparently occurred that crossed the line, but I think we need to be patient on this.
I definitely think it's unacceptable to be using chemical weapons on your own public, but I also think that for the U.S., there are larger implications that need to be thought about with Iran and with Israel, and thinking about how we need to act diplomatically.
Alan Buckner, TVB News.
United Nations experts left Syria today after completing their investigation into last week's chemical attack. NBC News has more on their final day of inspection yesterday, as well as fears among Syrians over a possible U.S. strike.
UN weapons inspectors set off to try to prove chemical weapons were used in Syria, a mission governments around the world are watching. But they went today not to the site of the attacks to talk to those who'd been targeted, but to a Syrian army hospital to interview soldiers. Syria's government says the soldiers were victims of poison gases. As ever, the inspectors gave little away.
Why are you here? Because of our investigation.
They brought in medical equipment to take samples and took statements from at least 5 soldiers. The Syrians refused to allow journalists to talk to the troops. The inspectors will decide if a chemical attack happened here, but not who did it. They've spent 3 days in the homes and streets where hundreds died and thousands were affected by what was clearly an extraordinary artillery barrage last week. The US and many allies are convinced Syria's army was responsible. The government here blames rebels. On the capital's streets today, they are waiting for retaliation from the United States. Today, all day, the smoke and noise of explosions in Damascus. Syria's army shelling suburbs, ready too for retaliation.
So Damascus tonight is tense. People here fearful, waiting for another twist in this 2-year war. All eyes, even here, now on Washington.
To other news now, at least 15 people were killed in a liquid ammonia leak at a storage facility in Shanghai. 26 others were injured, 6 critically. They were rushed to hospital for treatment. The incident happened this morning at a refrigeration unit at the facility in the city's Baoshan district. Local authorities are trying to find out what caused the leak. This is the latest in a series of industrial accidents hitting the mainland.
Also on the mainland, 4 people were killed and 10 injured after an earthquake this morning shook the country's southwest. The 5.9 magnitude quake hit an area bordering Shangri-La and Dechen counties in Yunnan province and Durong County in Sichuan province. The quake and its aftershocks triggered landslides that blocked roads and cut power in some places. Xinhua News Agency reports that 600 homes were destroyed and 9,000 people were forced to relocate.
On to local news now. Basic Law Committee Deputy Director Elsie Leung made clear today Beijing has the ultimate say on any changes made to the 2017 chief executive election, as well as future Legislative Council polls. Elsie Leung spoke about political reform at a luncheon today. She didn't say if a recent proposal raised by pan-Democrats is in line with the Basic Law. They want the nomination committee to allow candidates to contest the 2017 chief executive election if they manage to collect the signatures of 2% of registered voters. That is 80,000 people. But she did say doubts have been raised. Whether it's 100,000 people or 80,000 people, does this mean the nomination committee should allow that candidate to stand? Leung said people are questioning if this would then usurp the power of the nomination committee. She said there are concerns that if too many people are running, then candidates may not be able to get 50% support, which she warned could mean no one gets elected. According to Hong Kong's mini-constitution, any amendments in the way the chief executive is chosen must get the endorsement of a 2/3 majority in LegCo, the consent of the chief executive, and the approval of the National People's Congress Standing Committee. For changes on how legislators are chosen, the Basic Law requires the same steps, except it states that the amendments shall be reported to the MPC Standing Committee for the record. But Leung clarified that for the record means the proposals would be scrutinized and that the Standing Committee's approval is indeed needed. She said if Beijing doesn't like the changes submitted, the Standing Committee can simply choose not to make a record of it. There has been much controversy over higher stamp duties, which the government hoped would cool the property market. Calling them Big Brother measures, a legislator is planning to table amendments at the next LegCo session to try to provide relief for buyers. The buyer's stamp duty aims to curb property speculation while exempting Hong Kong residents who are buying homes for the first time. But businesses aren't exempt from the 15% tax. The government said this is to plug a potential loophole, preventing non-Hong Kong residents from trying to evade the tax by purchasing homes through locally registered companies. Speaking to TVB News today, the lawmaker representing the real estate and construction sector called it Big Brother-style government interference.
They deprive me of my basic rights of choice. It's not a handout. A handout they can dictate. Rights they cannot interfere.
Sheikh even tried to enlist pro-democracy lawmakers in the fight, saying they're always championing basic human rights and principles. He plans to put forward an amendment when LegCo resumes to exempt corporate buyers from the duty.
Subject to a number of conditions. Within 3 years, they cannot transfer the shares. Within 3 years, if they sell, they have to sell to Hong Kong people. And within 3 years, if they sell, they have to declare it again. And if there's anything that outside the 3 conditions, then they have to pay the stamp duty plus compensation.
Sheikh also plans to table a second amendment that would waive a higher stamp duty for buyers of non-residential properties.
Why touch the commercial and office and industrial premises? Because they are actually part of our economic activity. This deters a lot of other companies coming to Hong Kong to invest in Hong Kong, to create jobs in Hong Kong, to make Hong Kong prosper as a financial center.
He complained that the government had not considered them carefully before pushing through the market cooling measures and hopes his amendments will rectify the situation. Diane To, TVB News.
Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Greg So says ATV Executive Director James Singh cannot become a director at the broadcaster in future. Singh has already been ordered to step down as executive director by the Communications Authority in a controversy involving the station's major investor. João de Silva reports.
A $1 million fine and the removal of ATV's current executive director, James Singh. That was the result of a Communications Authority investigation which concluded that Singh had allowed ATV's major investor Wang Zheng to unduly exercise de facto control of the station. A group of ATV employees and supporters rallied earlier this week in a show of support for Singh, and the broadcaster has vowed to appeal the decision. Today, Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development Gregory So said the government has yet to receive ATV's appeal.
The communication authorities have already indicated Mr. James Singh is not a fit and proper person. And in order to have control of a licensee, you will need to be a fit and proper person. So Mr. Singh would not be able to assume executive director position or an ordinary director position.
Singh has been ordered to step down as executive director by Monday. The controversy comes at a time when the government is considering whether to allow more broadcasters into Hong Kong's free-to-air television market. HKTV, PCCW and iCable Communications have all applied for a license. The government has not yet announced a decision. João de Silva, TVB News.
And when we come back, fresh anti-government protests rock Egypt. Locally stepping up the fight against light pollution. And fanfare as the National Games officially open.
And welcome back. Tens of thousands of anti-government protesters took to the streets in several cities across Egypt yesterday. In the biggest show of defiance since hundreds of demonstrators were killed 2 weeks ago, they rallied against the military coup that ousted former President Mohamed Morsi and the deadly crackdown that followed. Sonia Artero reports.
Intimidation in the form of tear gas, live bullets, and detention did nothing to stop protesters in Cairo. That's where an estimated 10,000 Muslim Brotherhood supporters took to the streets. Police say at least 3 people died and dozens were injured during a rash of clashes. While military forces took to shooting off tear gas, crowds armed with a yellow 4-finger sign marched on. The 4-finger Rabba sign is now the official symbol of defiance among protesters. It's synonymous with the crushing of protest camps earlier this month by the army-backed government. Hoisting that sign, protesters chanted slogans against the army chief who led the July 3rd coup that toppled Mohamed Morsi. Thousands more protested in other cities, and many were not Muslim Brotherhood members. They rallied to seek justice for relatives killed when security forces shot dead hundreds of people on August 14th. In the deposed president's hometown of Sharqiya, bloody clashes broke out on the streets there. While thousands protested against Morsi's removal, youths were seen throwing stones as security forces tried flushing them out with tear gas. Back in Cairo, many Egyptians say they just want life to return to normal.
Still, we are working hard to get the tourists back to Egypt. But we just hope the safety in Egypt will be as before, as soon as possible.
Something's gotta give soon. Statistics reveal Egypt is suffering its worst economic crisis in decades. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
A juvenile court in India today convicted a teenager of rape and murder. This marks the first conviction stemming from last year's brutal gang rape of a woman on a moving bus in New Delhi. The defendant, who was 17 years old at the time of the attack, was sentenced to 3 years in a reform home. He was one of 6 men accused of luring a 23-year-old woman and her male companion onto a bus where they raped her and threw her out of the moving vehicle. She later died of her injuries in a Singapore hospital. 4 of the other defendants are being tried in a fast-track court where they face the death penalty. The 6th defendant was found dead in his jail cell in March. The court is expected to hand down the rest of the verdicts next month.
Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has ordered a strong military presence in Bogota after violent protests wreaked havoc in the country's capital. 2 people were killed in clashes after a peaceful demonstration in support of striking farmers became violent. President Santos ordered 50,000 troops to be deployed in the city. Meanwhile, the striking farmers announced they would lift road blockades they'd set up that snarled traffic for almost 2 weeks. Negotiators representing the demonstrators and the Colombian government said they'd reached a deal to clear the roadblocks while maintaining protests along the roadsides. The farmers are protesting against high tariffs on fertilizer and pesticides.
Back locally, efforts to fight light pollution are in high gear. Green groups have called on the government to pass legislation to limit lighting in the display of billboards at night. Vicky Kung has more.
Sometimes what you think is pretty may be annoying to others, especially to those who live in busy commercial districts. Green activists have called for regulations that require advertisement and decoration billboards to be switched off after 11 p.m. each night.
We think that without the law, it is very difficult to urge the shops to turn on the lights by themselves.
The government's task force on external lighting is collecting public opinion on restrictions of billboard display. Some welcomed the legislation and cited some of the problems associated with it. This man says LED lights often attract insects, but others are worried about security under dark conditions. The task force suggests that exemptions could be granted to lights that have special functions, such as street lamps that could help deter crime. Festive decorations may also be exempt thanks to government monitoring in future. Researchers at the University of Hong Kong are also studying the issue. They are trying to find out if worsening air pollution could lead to worsening light pollution.
Hong Kong has no laws regulating light nuisance or wastage yet. But as responsible citizens or companies, we can always give idle light usage a gentle tap. Vicky Kung, TVB News.
With the new school year just around the corner, there are growing concerns about students with special needs. Integrated education gives them a taste of mainstream education. But as Stephanie Choi reports, debate rages on whether that truly meets the children's needs.
Mrs. So has a 10-year-old autistic child who has been attending an international school since primary 2. He spent primary 1 at a local mainstream school where he had difficulty concentrating in class. He was an easy target for punishment, his mother said, referring to his teachers who did not have experience dealing with children with special needs. She added that her relationship with her son became strained when he began throwing tantrums due to the stress he faced at school. Integrated education applies to 8 categories of students with special needs. These include kids with learning and physical disabilities. In the 2012-2013 academic year, about 17,000 special needs students studied at mainstream primary schools, while 14,500 joined mainstream secondary schools. Professor Hao Kit-tai of Chinese University said no single education system fits all. With untrained staff, some schools are unable to foster a suitable learning atmosphere for special needs students, he said. Hao encouraged parents to seek alternatives. Experts believe communicating with schools to find out what works best for their children is a good way to start. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
All right, Chris, over to you for sports. Some excitement going on.
Yeah, up to Liaoning we go, where there's a myriad of sights and sounds. At least there were at the opening ceremony of the 12th National Games. President Xi Jinping was on hand for the festivities. And for the first time in 26 years, the opening ceremony was held during the daytime. This was an effort to cut down on the expenses for lighting and fireworks. Organizers have promised an economical and efficient event with a budget of no more than 800 million yuan. Close to 10,000 athletes will compete in more than 30 sports over the next 2 weeks. Hong Kong has sent 223 athletes to the Games. Bayern Munich defeated Chelsea in a penalty shootout to lift the UEFA Super Cup. The competition brings together the Champions League and Europa League winners. Jameson Wong with more.
Manuel Neuer saved Romelu Lukaku's shot to give Bayern the win 5-4 on penalties. The match was tied 2-2 before the shootout. Chelsea reduced to 10 men in the 85th minute. Goals from Fernando Torres, Frank Ribéry, Eden Hazard, with Javi Martinez scoring the equalizer on the last kick of the game.
I am happy for all of them, not just one or two, all of them. So to win Chelsea, Mourinho, is always so difficult, always so difficult, and for that reason we are so happy.
In my opinion, the best team lost. The team that deserves more to win lost, but that's football. Sometimes it happens in football. Not always the best team wins. Not always the team that deserves more win the game. So it's acceptable because that's football.
This was Pep Guardiola's first trophy with his new team after his boatload with Barcelona. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
At the U.S. Open, a major upset on the men's side. Former world #1 Leighton Hewitt beat #6 seed Juan Martín del Potro in 5 sets. The match, a battle of past champions at Flushing Meadows, lasted more than 4 hours. Hewitt had dropped out of the top 50. And the 32-year-old Australian was even advised to retire because of a toe injury. Meanwhile, Del Potro recently won on the hard courts in Washington. Pundits predicted the Argentine would go deep in the draw.
And that's the news for tonight.
Thanks for watching.
Hello everyone, it was cloudy today with showers and a few squally thunderstorms. At 5 p.m., a trough of low pressure was bringing unsettled weather to the coastal areas of Guangdong. Today's temperatures range from 24.6 to 29.5 degrees, and the current temperature is 25.3 degrees Celsius. 34.1 millimeters of rain has been recorded since midnight. So Freddie, how's the weather tomorrow? Cloudy with showers and a few squally thunderstorms. Temperatures will range from 25 to 29 degrees. Tomorrow's API is forecast at 30 to 120, and the pollution level will range from medium to very high. The maximum UV index forecast for tomorrow will be about 3. Now, here's the latest global weather update. Cloudy in Shanghai and Xiamen. Showers in Macau, cloudy in Chengdu. Cloudy in Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo. Rain in Ho Chi Minh City and Manila. Thunderstorms in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. Rain in Karachi, showers in Mumbai. Sunny in Cairo, sunny intervals in Nairobi. Showers in Brisbane, sunny in Sydney and Auckland. Cloudy in Toronto and New York. Sunny in Vancouver, cloudy in San Francisco. Cloudy in London and Frankfurt, sunny in Paris. And that's the weather. Have a great evening.